The cold seeped through the steel of the rifle, a familiar ache in her palms. Each component, laid out on the oil-stained cloth, was a piece of a mechanical catechism she had memorized years ago. The bolt carrier group, the firing pin, the charging handle. They were extensions of a will forged in environments far colder than this Alaskan armory. She worked in silence, her breath a faint plume in the frigid air. The rhythmic scrape of the carbon scraper against the bolt tail was the only sound she permitted herself to make, a small, disciplined noise in a world of loud men. Outside the small window, wind howled across the snow-swept tundra of Forward Operating Base Kodiak, a relentless, keening sound that promised isolation. A burst of laughter, sharp and condescending, echoed from the far end of the long concrete room. It was Sergeant Rex Thorne and his squad, their voices thick with the easy confidence of men who believed their own legends. They saw her as an attachment, a box to be checked on a diversity report from command, Sharma, the specialist. They never used her first name. To them, she was a shadow in tactical gear, an analyst or a liaison officer, someone who carried a weapon but would never truly understand its purpose. "Look at her," Thorne's voice carried, deliberately loud, polishing it like it's a show pony. "Bet she's never even had it dirty." Another laugh, this one less certain, from a younger soldier. Sharma did not look up. Her focus remained on the star chamber brush, twisting it with precise economical movements. Her world had contracted to this small circle of light on the workbench. The rifle was an instrument. Respect for the instrument was paramount. Their noise was irrelevant, a form of static she had long ago learned to filter out. She dipped a clean patch in solvent, the sharp, clean scent of the fluid cutting through the metallic tang of the room. She wiped down the bolt, her fingers moving with the unthinking grace of a surgeon. The steel gleamed under the harsh fluorescent light, perfect and sterile. Her sleeves were rolled up to her forearms, a practical habit to keep the cuffs clean from oil and carbon residue. It was a small, unconscious action that would soon change everything. She was just cleaning her weapon. The heavy door to the armory groaned open, letting in a swirl of wind and snow. The laughter from Thorne's corner died down, replaced by the shuffling of boots and the sharp call of, "Attention!" General Madsen entered, his face a mask of hardened granite carved by decades of command. He was old school, a man who had seen conflict in every climate the world had to offer. His inspection tour was the reason for the base's heightened state of nervous energy. He walked with a quiet authority that needed no volume. His gaze swept the room, missing nothing. He nodded curtly at Thorne's squad, his eyes lingering for a moment on their posturing before moving on. Then his eyes found her. He saw a woman of indeterminate age, her dark hair pulled back in a severe, functional bun. He saw the intense focus, the way she handled the weapon parts not as a soldier performing a chore, but as a craftsman tending to a masterwork. He started to walk toward her workbench, his boots making quiet, solid sounds on the concrete floor. Thorne, sensing an opportunity to belittle the observer in front of a flag officer, stepped forward. "General, this is Specialist Sharma," Thorne began, a smirk playing on his lips. "She's our attachment from analytics, keeping her gear parade ready." Madsen ignored him. He was closer now, his gaze fixed not on the rifle, but on her arms, on the pale, intricate web of silvery lines that crisscrossed the skin of her forearms. They were not the jagged, chaotic scars of an accident. They were deliberate, patterned, and old. There was the faint ladder-like tracing from a heated grate, a classic mark from a specific school of resistance training. There was a small, circular scar near her wrist, perfectly round, a brand almost. And higher up, a long, thin line that followed the muscle, a wound from a blade that had been treated with precision, not panic. The general stopped. He did not just pause. He froze. His breath caught, a barely audible hitch. The air in the room became heavy, charged. Thorne's smirk faltered, replaced by confusion. He saw scars. The general saw a history. He saw the cost of entry into a world that officially, until very recently, did not include women. A world he knew intimately. His voice, when he finally spoke, was low, almost a whisper. It was not directed at Thorne or anyone else. It was for her alone. "The water is cold in Coronado," he said. It was not a question. It was a statement, a key for a lock very few people knew existed. Sharma did not stop her work. She picked up the firing pin, wiped it down, and inspected the tip for wear. Without looking up, she replied, her voice just as quiet, level, and devoid of emotion. "It's colder in Kodiak, sir." The answer was correct. It was the countersign. The general's eyes, a pale, piercing blue, met hers for the first time. The hard lines of his face softened into something else, not warmth, but a profound, solemn recognition. He saw past the specialist rank on her collar, past the quiet observer role she was playing. He saw the ghost of a trident on her chest. Thorne and his men saw a recruit cleaning her weapon. General Madsen saw a Navy SEAL. And the entire foundation of their comfortable, dismissive world began to crack. The base was a temporary city of prefabricated modules and hardened shelters, dropped onto a desolate stretch of coastline where the mountains met the sea. It was a place designed for function over comfort, a grid of gravel paths connecting identical gray buildings under a perpetually overcast sky. The wind was a constant presence, a physical force that scoured the landscape and the morale of the men stationed there. It was a place for hardening soldiers, for pushing them to their limits before they faced a real enemy. Anya Sharma found the austerity calming. It was an environment that rewarded discipline and punished carelessness, a meritocracy of survival. Her assignment here was vague, listed in her file as Tactical Systems Integration Analyst. It was a title that meant everything and nothing. She was to observe Sergeant Thorne's Tier 2 Special Operations Team, document their performance with new communications gear, and file reports. In practice, it meant she was a piece of furniture that followed them around. Thorne had made his opinion of her clear from the first day. He saw her presence as an insult, a sign that command believed his team needed a babysitter from a technical division, and a female one at that. His team, Alpha Squad, was a reflection of its leader. They were competent, physically powerful, and deeply insular. They moved with a swagger that bordered on arrogance, their camaraderie built on shared hardship and a lexicon of inside jokes that invariably excluded her. Thorne was the alpha, a bull of a man with a booming voice and an unshakable belief in his own tactical prowess. His second in command, a wiry man named Gallo, was his echo. The others fell in line. The only one who ever showed a flicker of independent thought was Corporal Davis, the youngest member. He was quiet, observant, and occasionally she would catch him watching her, not with the overt skepticism of the others, but with a cautious curiosity. Her daily routine was simple. She attended their briefings, standing in the back of the room. She followed them to the range, recording data on a ruggedized tablet as they fired. She sat alone in the mess hall, the invisible wall around Alpha Squad's table as solid as any blast door. She never offered an opinion. She never complained. She simply watched, listened, and documented. Her silence was misinterpreted as timidity, her methodical nature as bureaucratic box-ticking. The institutional bias was subtle but pervasive. It was in the way Thorne would explain basic concepts to her in a patronizing tone, assuming she had no field experience. It was in the way the supply sergeant always gave her the oldest gear, saving the newest issue for the real operators. It was in the casual assumption that she could not keep up on forced marches, an assumption they never bothered to test. They did not know that she spent 2 hours every morning before they were even awake in the base's small, cold gym, her workout a grueling, precise regimen of strength and endurance that would have humbled any one of them. She did not do it for them. She did it for herself, for the standards that had been beaten into her soul long ago. The incident in the armory had sent a ripple through the base's small community. General Madsen had not explained his reaction, nor had he spoken to Thorne about it. He had simply finished his inspection, his demeanor toward Anya shifting from professional distance to a quiet, deep-set respect. He had asked her about the new comms gear, but his questions were not about data transfer rates. They were about its weight, its durability in salt water, its battery life in sub-zero temperatures. They were the questions of an operator, not a general. The change was not lost on Thorne. He could not comprehend the source of it, and the mystery gnawed at his ego. His dismissal of her curdled into a more active hostility. The escalation came 2 days later, during a scheduled drill at the base's shoot house. The structure was a maze of plywood and steel, designed to simulate close-quarters battle. The goal was speed and precision, neutralize the targets, secure the objective, and do it faster than the other squads. It was the arena where Thorne's team honed their aggression. They gathered at the entrance, the air thick with the smell of gunpowder and testosterone. Thorne was briefing his men, using a whiteboard to sketch out the layout. He pointedly ignored Anya, who stood off to the side, tablet in hand, ready to record the drill's telemetry. "Standard diamond formation on entry," Thorne barked, slapping the whiteboard with his pointer. "Gallo, you're on breach. Davis, rear security. We go hard, we go fast. 2 minutes, clean run. That's the standard." He turned, his eyes finally landing on her. A cruel smile spread across his face. "Specialist, you paying attention? This is how the pointy end of the spear works. A little different from your spreadsheets, I imagine." The other men chuckled. Davis shifted his weight, his eyes on the ground. Anya simply nodded, her expression unreadable. "I'm recording, Sergeant." "Good. Make sure you get our good side," Thorne shot back. He turned to his team. "All right, let's show the analyst how it's done." They executed the drill with their usual explosive force. A plastic charge blew the door, and they flooded the rooms in a whirlwind of noise and movement. They were fast. There was no denying it. But they were also clumsy. They overpenetrated rooms, their fields of fire crossed dangerously, and they communicated in shouts that would have given away their position to any thinking enemy. They finished in 2 minutes and 12 seconds, with 2 civilian hostage targets accidentally shot in the simulated crossfire. Thorne emerged, sweating and energized, clapping his men on the back. A little sloppy on the collateral, but the speed was there. "Good aggression, boys." He looked at Anya, expecting her to be impressed. "Well, Specialist, what does the data say?" She looked down at her tablet, then back at him. Her voice was flat, clinical. "Runtime was 2:12. 2 friendly fire incidents, a 12-second deviation from your projected time." Thorne's face darkened. He had expected awe, not a dispassionate critique. The public statement of his failure, however minor, was an unforgivable challenge. "All right, analyst," he snarled, his voice dripping with contempt. "You think it's so easy to do better? You've been watching us for weeks. Why don't you show us how it's done?" He was goading her, trying to humiliate her. The challenge was a breach of protocol. She was an observer, not a participant. The other men fell silent, watching the confrontation unfold. They expected her to refuse, to shrink back behind the regulations. Anya looked at Thorne, her gaze steady. She considered the situation. Refusing would reinforce their perception of her as a timid bureaucrat. Accepting was a risk, but it was also an opportunity. She had remained passive for weeks. Perhaps it was time for a small demonstration. She set her tablet down on a nearby crate. "What's the course of fire?" she asked, her voice calm. Thorne was taken aback. He had not expected her to agree. A vicious grin spread across his face. "Same as ours, full loadout. Go on, gear up. We'll even time you." He gestured to a spare set of body armor and a rifle. The implication was clear. She was using their gear on their terms. This was his arena. Anya walked over to the equipment. She did not complain or hesitate. She methodically checked the rifle, dropping the magazine, clearing the chamber, and testing the action. She adjusted the plate carrier, tightening the straps until it fit snugly against her torso. Her movements were fluid and efficient, without a single wasted motion. Davis watched her, a look of dawning realization on his face. He had seen that kind of economy of motion before in the senior instructors at selection. It was the mark of someone who had lived in their gear for years, not just worn it for exercises. She stood at the entrance to the shoot house, rifle held at a low ready. She took one deep centering breath, her eyes closed for a fraction of a second. The world of mockery and ego fell away. There was only the problem in front of her, a structure, a series of angles, and a set of objectives. "Timer starts when you cross the threshold," Thorne called out, his voice full of smug anticipation. Anya opened her eyes. They were cold and clear. She took a step forward, and the demonstration began. She did not use an explosive breach. Instead, she approached the door at an angle, testing the handle. It was unlocked, a detail Thorne's team had overlooked in their haste to use explosives. She swung it open with one foot, staying clear of the potential line of fire from within, the fatal funnel. She did not rush in. She paused for a single, calculated second in the doorway, her head canting slightly as she processed the geometry of the room. This was not about speed, it was about efficiency. Her entry was silent and fluid. She moved not like a soldier, but like a predator. She stayed low, using the corners for cover, her rifle's muzzle tracking smoothly ahead of her eyes. The first target appeared on her left. There was no frantic spray of bullets. A controlled double tap, 2 rounds precisely placed in the center mass, the sound shockingly quiet compared to the full auto roar of Thorne's team. She did not stop to admire her work. She was already moving, flowing into the next room like water finding its level. The men watching on the monitors were silent. Thorne's smirk had vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed disbelief. They were witnessing a different kind of warfare. Thorne's method was a sledgehammer, designed to shatter and overwhelm. Hers was a scalpel, designed to dissect with lethal precision. She cleared rooms by slicing the pie, exposing herself to the absolute minimum danger as she acquired new angles of sight. She processed information at an incredible speed, identifying targets, non-targets, and potential threats in fractions of a second. In the final room, 2 hostage targets were positioned on either side of the last enemy pop-up target. It was a classic no-win scenario designed to test trigger discipline. Thorne's men had shot through the hostage to get the enemy. Anya entered the room, saw the setup, and paused. She took a half-step to her right, changing the angle of her shot by a mere 10 degrees. From this new position, she had a clean line of fire to the sliver of the enemy target visible behind the hostage's shoulder. She fired a single round. The enemy target dropped. The hostage targets remained untouched. She cleared the final corner, lowered her weapon, and walked out the exit. Her breathing was even, her face impassive. She had not broken a sweat. She walked back to the starting point and began to methodically unload the rifle. She placed the magazine on the crate next to her tablet. Davis was holding the stopwatch, his hand trembling slightly. He stared at it, then up at her, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and fear. "Well?" Thorne demanded, his voice strained. "What's the time?" Davis swallowed hard. 1 minute, 21 seconds, he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Clean run, no friendlies." 51 seconds faster, a lifetime in combat, and perfect accuracy. A profound, uncomfortable silence descended over the squad. They stared at Anya, no longer seeing a quiet analyst, but something else entirely, something far more dangerous. Thorne looked as if he had been physically struck. He had wanted to humiliate her, to put her in her place. Instead, she had dismantled his entire tactical philosophy without saying a single word. His authority had been shattered, not by a challenge or an argument, but by a simple, undeniable display of superior competence. Anya picked up her tablet, her face giving away nothing. "I have the data from both runs, Sergeant," she said, her voice still perfectly level. "I will include it in my report." The air was still thick with unspoken shock when the klaxon blared across the base. The harsh, repetitive alarm signified a real-world emergency, cutting through the tension like a blade. Every soldier on the base froze, their training kicking in. The casual atmosphere of the training exercise evaporated, replaced by a cold, professional focus. Doors to the barracks and administrative buildings flew open as personnel scrambled to their posts. Over the base-wide intercom, a clipped, urgent voice announced, "Condition red. All Alpha-level assets to Briefing Room 01 immediately. I repeat, condition red." Thorne, his face still pale from the humiliation at the shoot-house, snapped back into command mode. The alarm was a release, a chance to reassert his authority in a real crisis. "You heard him! Move!" he bellowed at his squad. They grabbed their gear and sprinted toward the main command building, their boots crunching on the frozen gravel. Anya followed, her pace a steady, ground-eating stride that kept her right behind them without any visible effort. The nature of her role was about to shift. An observer in training was one thing, an observer on a live mission was another. The briefing room was a windowless, sterile space dominated by a large holographic map table. General Madsen stood at the head of it, his face grim. The base commander and a communications officer stood beside him. The holographic display showed a topographical map of the brutal, snow-covered mountain range that loomed over the base. At 0400 hours this morning, Madsen began, his voice cutting through the quiet hum of the electronics. A reconnaissance drone, callsign Watcher, went down in the Kavanir mountain range. Its last known position is here. He pointed to a blinking red dot in a deep, inaccessible valley. This was not a standard surveillance drone. Watcher was carrying a prototype quantum encryption module. If that module falls into enemy hands, our entire communication network in this theater could be compromised. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. The drone's self-destruct mechanism failed. We have satellite imagery showing a small, irregular military unit moving toward the crash site. We assess they are a Spetsnaz deep reconnaissance team, likely operating out of the contested territories to the north. They know what that drone is, and they want it. Thorne stepped forward. We can have a team ready to move in 30 minutes, General. Madsen shook his head. Negative, Sergeant. That's the other problem. The communications officer tapped a few controls, and the holographic map shifted to show an ominous, swirling weather pattern moving in from the north. A polar vortex is descending on the region, the worst blizzard this area has seen in a decade. It will hit the mountains within the next 6 hours. All air assets are grounded. There will be no insertion, no fire support, and no extraction. If you go in, you're on your own until this storm breaks, which could be 48 hours or more. The room was silent. A ground infiltration on foot into hostile territory with a blizzard moving in against Russian special forces. It was a suicide mission. It's a recovery and destroy mission, Madsen continued, his eyes scanning the faces of Thorne's team. Get to the drone, recover the encryption module, and destroy the drone's chassis. Avoid contact with the enemy if possible. If not, neutralize them. This module cannot be captured. Thorne's jaw was set. This was the kind of mission his team was made for. High risk, high stakes. It was a chance to redeem himself, to prove that his team was the best. We'll get it done, sir, he said with grim certainty. Madsen's gaze then shifted to Anya. Specialist Sharma, your orders are to accompany Alpha Squad. Your technical expertise with encrypted systems may be necessary to safely remove the module without triggering its anti-tampering defenses. Thorne's head whipped around, his face a mask of disbelief. General, with all due respect, this is no place for an analyst. It's too dangerous. We'll be moving fast. She is not an analyst, Sergeant, Madsen cut him off, his voice like ice. The statement hung in the air, unexplained. She has the relevant security clearances and the necessary survival qualifications. She is going. That is an order. Thorne clamped his jaw shut, but his resentment was a palpable force in the room. He was being saddled with a liability, a civilian in all but name, on the most dangerous mission of his career. He looked at Anya with open contempt. Her flawless run in the shoot house was a fluke, a parlor trick. This was reality. The mountains and the enemy would break her. Anya met his gaze, her expression unchanged. She gave a single sharp nod to the general. Understood, sir. There was no time for further argument. The team had 90 minutes to draw their cold weather gear, ammunition, and rations, and to be at the motor pool. The mission was on. As they filed out of the briefing room, the weight of the task ahead settled on them. They were heading into the teeth of a blizzard to race a team of elite enemy soldiers for a prize that could tip the balance of power in the entire region. Anya knew that the real test was not the enemy waiting in the mountains, but the crumbling authority of the man leading them there. The storm was coming, both outside and within the small squad that was walking out into the frozen dark. The first hours of the trek were a grueling, monotonous climb. They moved in single file, dark shapes against an endless expanse of white. The snow was deep, forcing them to lift their knees high with every step, a thigh-burning, lung-searing effort. The world was shades of gray and white, the sky a low, oppressive ceiling of bruised-looking clouds. The wind was rising, a low moan that snaked through the rock outcroppings and tugged at their gear. Anya moved in the second-to-last position, just ahead of Davis, who was covering their rear. She felt a strange sense of peace in the rhythmic crunch of her snowshoes, the steady burn in her muscles, the cold air stinging her face. This was a familiar state of being, a body in motion, a mind focused on the immediate task. The cold, the exertion, the danger, they were clarifying forces, stripping away the non-essential. Thorne set a punishing pace. He was at the front of the line, driving the team forward with a grim, relentless energy. It was clear he was trying to prove a point, to re-establish his dominance through sheer physical will. He wanted to show them all, especially Anya, that he was the strongest, the fastest, the one who could endure the most. But his pace was inefficient. He was burning through the team's energy reserves too quickly, pushing them toward exhaustion before they even reached the objective. Anya monitored her own body with practiced discipline. She kept her breathing slow and deep, conserving heat and energy. She took small, regular sips from the insulated tube of her water bladder, fighting off dehydration despite the cold. She watched the members of the team ahead of her, noting the subtle signs of fatigue, a slight slump in the shoulders of Gallo, a stumble from the team's heavy weapons specialist, a man named Peters. As they ascended higher into the mountains, the weather began to turn. The low moan of the wind escalated into a piercing shriek. Snow, which had been falling lightly, began to drive down in a thick, blinding curtain. Visibility dropped from 100 yards to less than 20. The world shrank to a swirling vortex of white. The temperature plummeted. Exposed skin felt like it was being burned by fire. It was during the crossing of a steep, ice-covered scree slope that the first real problem occurred. Peters, his legs heavy with fatigue from Thorne's relentless pace, lost his footing. He slid 10 feet down the icy slope, his leg twisting awkwardly beneath him before he slammed into a snow-covered boulder. A sharp cry of pain was ripped away by the wind. Thorne cursed and scrambled down to him. The rest of the team huddled together, shielding themselves from the wind. Anya moved to Peters' side, her medical pouch already in her hand. Thorne was trying to pull him to his feet. "Get up, Peters. We can't stop here." "It's my ankle, Sarge," Peters groaned, his face pale and beaded with sweat despite the freezing cold. "I think it's broken." Anya knelt, her gloved fingers gently probing the area around his boot. She could feel the unnatural swelling through the thick material. "It's either a severe sprain or a fracture," she stated, her voice calm and authoritative, cutting through Thorne's panicked urgency. "He can't put any weight on it. We need to splint it and get him out of this wind." She worked quickly, pulling 2 collapsible splinting rods from her pack and securing his leg. Her movements were sure and practiced. She administered a dose of painkiller from her kit, then looked up at Thorne. The wind was now a physical wall, threatening to knock them off their feet. The blizzard was no longer coming. It was here. "We need to find shelter," she said, her voice raised to be heard over the gale. "Continuing in these conditions with an injured man is a death sentence." Thorne stared into the whiteout, his face a mask of frustration. His plan, his aggressive push to the objective, was literally blowing up in his face. He was losing control. "There's no shelter up here. We have to push through to the valley." Anya scanned the terrain, her eyes narrowed against the driving snow. Her training had taught her to read the land, to see the subtle clues that others missed. She pointed to a dark shape barely visible through the swirling snow, a jagged outcrop of rock about 50 yards away. "The leeward side of that rock formation. There might be an overhang, a small cave. It's our best chance." Thorne hesitated. Following her suggestion was another admission of his own failure, but looking at Peters' face, now contorted in pain and feeling the sheer force of the storm, he knew she was right. "Fine," he bit out. "Gallo Davis, help me with Peters. We'll rig a damn stretcher." They fashioned a makeshift drag litter from a tarp and a pair of ski poles. The 50-yard journey to the rock formation was a brutal, desperate struggle against the elements. The wind tore at them, and the snow was now so thick they could barely see the man in front of them. It took them nearly 30 minutes to cover the short distance. Anya had been right. Tucked behind the massive granite outcrop was a shallow cave, barely more than a deep overhang, but it was enough to get them out of the direct path of the wind. They collapsed inside, exhausted, their bodies steaming in the cold air. The relative quiet inside the shelter was a jarring contrast to the roaring chaos outside. The team was battered and demoralized. Peters was injured, and they were trapped by the storm, miles from their objective. Thorne's aggressive leadership had led them into a ditch. He slumped against the back wall of the cave, staring out at the impenetrable wall of white, his authority in tatters. Anya, however, was already working. She checked on Peters, ensuring his core temperature was stable. She directed the others to get out their emergency bivouac sacks and thermal blankets. We need to conserve body heat, eat a high-energy ration bar, drink water. We don't know how long we'll be here. Her voice was not one of command, but of quiet, logical instruction. In the absence of Thorne's blustering leadership, the men listened. They were cold, tired, and scared, and her calm competence was a lifeline. She moved through the small group, checking their gear, making sure no one was showing signs of frostbite. She pulled out her own map, a physical copy sealed in a waterproof case. The holographic display on their tactical tablets had long since become useless, the satellite link severed by the storm. She studied the map under the dim red light of her headlamp, her finger tracing the contour lines. "Where are we?" Davis asked, his voice subdued. He had moved to sit near her, subconsciously drawn to her aura of control. "Here," she said, pointing to a spot on the map. "We're about 3 kilometers from the objective, but the direct route Thorne was taking." She traced the path they had been on. "It leads directly across the face of the Cavanier Glacier. The new snowfall from this blizzard will have created a massive avalanche risk on that slope. If we had continued, the whole mountain could have come down on us." Davis stared at the map, then at her. He realized she had not just been following. She had been tracking their position, analyzing the terrain, and identifying threats that their leader, in his arrogant haste, had completely missed. She had potentially saved all their lives. The environment had turned on them, stripping away Thorne's simple, aggressive tactics and revealing their inadequacy. Now, trapped in a cave, with the storm raging and an enemy force somewhere in the darkness, the squad's hierarchy was being rewritten. It was not being rewritten by rank or by shouting, but by the undeniable physics of survival. Competence was the only authority that mattered now. And in the dim, cold light of the cave, it was becoming terrifyingly clear to everyone that Anya Sharma was the only one who truly possessed it. The hours bled into one another in the cramped, frigid darkness of the cave. The only sound was the incessant, maddening howl of the wind as it scoured the mountainside. They huddled together for warmth, a small, miserable cluster of humanity against the overwhelming power of nature. Thorne remained withdrawn, a sullen, brooding presence in the corner. His failure was a palpable thing, filling the space between them. The rest of the team looked to Anya, their questions and concerns directed at her in low whispers. When a momentary lull in the storm offered a sliver of visibility, Anya moved to the mouth of the cave. She studied the sky, the texture of the snow, the sound of the wind. These were the old ways of forecasting, the skills you learned when technology failed. "The storm is settling into a pattern," she announced, turning back to the group. "The intensity will peak for another few hours, then we should get a window of about 6 hours where the wind dies down before the second front hits. That's when we have to move." Thorne scoffed from his corner. "Move where? We're not leaving Peters." "We're not leaving him," Anya agreed, her tone even. "We're taking him with us, and we are not going forward. We're going to a new position." She knelt and spread her map on the floor, illuminating it with her headlamp. The others gathered around. "Going for the drone now is suicide. The enemy is likely hunkered down as well, but they'll be watching the crash site. When the storm breaks, they'll move on it. A direct approach is what they'll expect." Her finger traced a new path on the map. "There's a ridgeline here, about 2 kilometers east of our current position. It offers a commanding view of the entire valley, including the crash site. It's a perfect overwatch position. We move there during the window, set up a defensive perimeter, and we observe. We let the enemy come to the drone. We'll have the tactical advantage of high ground and surprise. We engage them on our terms." It was a sound, logical plan. It was patient, cautious, and intelligent. It was everything Thorne's original plan was not. "That's a defensive posture," Thorne sneered, finally finding his voice. "We were sent to recover, not to hide on a hill." "We were sent to secure the module," Anya corrected him calmly, "and to survive. Your approach will get us all killed and hand the module to the enemy. My approach gives us a chance to accomplish the mission and live." Gallo, Thorne's staunchest ally, looked uncertain. "She's got a point, Sarge. Going head-on into that valley after this storm, it's a turkey shoot." Davis was more direct. "I'm with her. It's the smart play. The fragile thread of Thorne's authority snapped. The loyalty of his men was shifting right before his eyes, moving from the man with the rank to the woman with the plan. He stood up, his large frame filling the small cave. I am the commander of this unit. We stick to the original mission. We push to the objective as soon as the storm breaks. There was a tense silence. The men looked from Thorne to Anya. They were at a crossroads. Anya did not raise her voice. She did not challenge his rank. She simply met his furious gaze and presented an undeniable truth. Sergeant, that path will get us killed. This one will not. She did not wait for his approval. She turned to the others. We have a few hours. Rest. Check your gear. We move as soon as the wind drops below 30 knots. She then moved to her pack and began methodically preparing her equipment, her actions conveying a certainty that no argument could shake. Davis was the first to break the stalemate. He nodded once, then moved to his own pack and began to follow her example. After a moment's hesitation, Gallo did the same. One by one, the rest of the team followed suit, leaving Thorne standing alone, his orders ignored. He was a leader with no one left to lead. The rage on his face was terrifying, but it was impotent. He could not force them to follow him into certain death. With a strangled curse, he kicked at a loose rock and slumped back into his corner. He had lost. When the storm finally offered its promised respite, the world outside was eerily quiet. The wind had died to a whisper, and the snow had stopped. The landscape was a pristine, untracked blanket of white under a sky the color of slate. It was a beautiful, deadly trap. They moved out, with Gallo and Davis carrying a now stable Peters on the improved stretcher. Anya took the lead, navigating by compass and terrain association. She moved with a steady, energy-conserving rhythm, her eyes constantly scanning, reading the snow for signs of instability, her ears attuned to the slightest sound. She was completely in her element. Thorne followed at the rear of the formation, a thunderous, resentful silence surrounding him. He was now just another passenger, his rank rendered meaningless. They reached the ridgeline just as the first hints of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky. As Anya had predicted, it was a perfect position. The ridge offered a panoramic, protected view of the valley below. Through her binoculars, she could clearly see the wreckage of the drone, a dark scar in the snow about 1,000 meters away. Everyone, find cover, she ordered quietly. Set up fields of fire covering the valley. No movement, no electronic signatures. We wait. They settled into the rocks and snow, becoming part of the mountain. The cold was brutal, but they were prepared. They lay in silence, watching and waiting. Hours passed. The sun rose, a pale, weak disk in the gray sky. The valley below remained still. Then they appeared. Anya spotted them first, 4 figures clad in white winter camouflage, moving with the fluid efficiency of elite soldiers. They emerged from a cluster of trees on the far side of the valley, advancing cautiously toward the drone. They were professionals, moving in formation, covering each other. Contact, Anya whispered into her radio, which was now working on a short-range line-of-sight frequency. 4 enemy combatants moving on the objective. Thorne, who had set up his own position nearby, focused his rifle scope on the figures. Let's light 'em up, he growled, his aggression resurfacing. We can take them from here. Negative, Anya countered, her voice sharp. The range is extreme, and the wind, however light, is a factor. A missed shot will give away our position. We wait for them to reach the drone. They will be stationary, exposed and clustered together. Then we engage. Thorne started to argue, but Davis's voice cut in over the radio. She's right, Sarge. It's the higher percentage shot. Thorne fell silent, clicking his tongue in frustration. They watched as the enemy team reached the drone. The 4 men gathered around the wreckage, 2 standing guard while the other 2 knelt, presumably working to extract the module. They were exactly where Anya wanted them. Execute, she said, her voice dropping to a cold, flat deadliness. On my mark. 3, 2, 1, mark. The silence of the mountain was shattered by the coordinated crack of 3 suppressed sniper rifles. Anya, Davis, and Gallo fired simultaneously. 3 of the enemy soldiers crumpled to the snow without a sound. The 4th, one of the guards, reacted with incredible speed, diving for cover behind the drone's fuselage. He's pinned down, Davis reported. Stay on him, Anya ordered. Thorne, Gallo, you're with me. We're moving down to secure the module. The rest of you, provide covering fire. Do not let that man break cover. She didn't wait for a response. She was already moving, using a series of natural depressions and rock formations to descend the slope with incredible speed and stealth. Thorne and Gallo scrambled to keep up. Thorne was driven by a desperate need to reclaim some semblance of control, to be at the center of the action. As they got closer, the lone surviving enemy soldier began to return fire, his rounds kicking up plumes of snow around their positions. He was a skilled operator, firing disciplined bursts to keep their heads down. I'll flank him, Thorne shouted, his voice high with adrenaline. Lay down suppressing fire. Negative, Anya yelled, but it was too late. Ignoring her command, Thorne broke cover, charging forward in a wide arc, his rifle blazing. It was a move born of pure ego, a desperate attempt to be the hero, and it was a fatal mistake. The enemy soldier, seeing the clumsy, aggressive maneuver, shifted his aim. A burst of automatic fire tore through the air. Thorne cried out and fell, clutching his side, his rifle tumbling into the snow. Thorne's hit, Gallo screamed. The enemy soldier, seeing his chance, prepared to finish Thorne off. But in that split second, his focus had been on Thorne. He had forgotten about Anya. She exploded from her cover, not with a charge, but with a low, predatory sprint that ate up the ground. The enemy soldier turned, his rifle coming up, but she was impossibly fast. She closed the distance before he could get a clean shot. The confrontation was brutal and short. He lunged with his rifle, using it as a bayonet. She deflected it, not by meeting force with force, but by redirecting its momentum, using his own energy to throw him off balance. As he stumbled, she moved inside his guard. Her left hand clamped onto the wrist of his gun hand, her thumb digging into the pressure point below his wrist bone, forcing his grip to loosen. Her right hand, holding her combat knife, moved in a tight, devastating arc. It was not a wild slash. It was a series of precise surgical strikes, a cut to the tendons behind his knee, buckling his leg, a thrust under his arm, severing the brachial artery, a final, decisive strike to the throat. The entire sequence took less than 3 seconds. It was a horrifying, intimate display of biomechanical destruction. The man collapsed into the snow, his eyes wide with surprise, the fight extinguished from him in an instant. Anya stood over him, her breathing controlled, her face a mask of cold fury. Not at the man she had just killed, but at the senseless waste, the ego that had nearly cost them everything. Gallo stared, horrified and mesmerized. He had seen countless firefights, but he had never seen anything like that. It was not a fight, it was an execution. Anya turned, her focus immediately shifting. Gallo, get to Thorne. Apply pressure to the wound. Davis, status. Target neutralized. Davis's voice crackled over the radio, filled with disbelief. Valley is clear. Anya ran to the drone, her knife already out. She sliced open a maintenance panel, her fingers finding the latches for the encryption module's housing. She knew the device's schematics by heart. With a few deft movements, she disengaged the anti-tampering system and pulled the black metallic box free. Mission accomplished, but the cost had been far too high. She looked from the module in her hand to where Gallo was desperately trying to stop the bleeding from Thorne's wound. The snow around him was turning a deep, dark red. The debriefing room was cold and silent, the air thick with the sterile scent of antiseptic from the adjoining medical bay. Thorne was alive, stabilized after emergency surgery. He would be flown back to a military hospital in Germany as soon as the weather cleared. His career as a field operator was over. General Madsen sat at the head of the long table. He had listened without interruption for the past hour, as Davis and Gallo gave their accounts of the mission. Their stories were clear, detailed, and corroborated by the data from their helmet cameras. They left no room for ambiguity. They described Anya's tactical plan, her navigation through the storm, her life-saving identification of the avalanche risk, and the lethal precision of the final confrontation. They also described, with professional reluctance, Thorne's insubordination and the reckless charge that had nearly gotten him killed. Madsen's face was unreadable, but his eyes were like chips of ice. When they had finished, he looked at the report Thorne had dictated from his medical bed, a weak, self-serving narrative that painted himself as a hero who had been tragically wounded while leading a charge. Madsen pushed the tablet containing the report to the center of the table with 2 fingers as if it were contaminated. Sergeant Thorne's version of events does not align with the facts, he stated, his voice dangerously quiet. His command is revoked, pending a full board of inquiry. I suspect he will be offered a medical discharge. The finality of the statement hung in the air. It was a quiet, brutal end to a career built on ego. Madsen then turned his gaze to Anya. She sat perfectly still, her hands resting on the table in front of her. She had not spoken unless asked a direct question, her answers always concise and factual. Commander Sharma, he said, the use of her former rank cutting through the formal atmosphere of the room. Davis and Gallo, who had only ever known her as specialist, straightened in their chairs, their eyes widening. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The scars, the skills, the quiet authority. It all made sense now. Your official report will be classified at the highest level, Madsen continued, but your actions on this mission, they went above and beyond the scope of your observational role. You saved the lives of every member of that team, and you secured an asset of critical national importance. The official commendation will be discreet. I trust you understand. Anya met his gaze and gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. I do, General. She did not want a medal. She did not want praise. She had simply done what was necessary. What happens now? She asked. Your assignment here is concluded, Madsen said. I'm reassigning you. We're putting together a new unit, a small, deniable operations group for unconventional problems. It will require a leader with a very specific set of skills and a great deal of discipline. He let the offer hang in the air, already knowing her answer. Later that evening, Anya was back in the armory. The room was empty, the lingering smell of solvent and steel a familiar comfort. Her own rifle, the one she'd been cleaning when this all began, was on the workbench in front of her. She had field-stripped it again, not because it was dirty, but because the ritual centered her. The events of the past 48 hours replayed in her mind, not as a chaotic whirlwind of emotion, but as a series of tactical problems and their solutions. The storm, the injury, Thorne's ego, the enemy ambush. Each had been a variable in a complex equation she was forced to solve. She felt no triumph, only a quiet, weary satisfaction that the equation had been balanced. She picked up the bolt carrier, its weight solid and real in her hand. She thought of Thorne, a man of immense physical strength and aggression, undone by his own pride. She thought of the young men of his team, good soldiers who had been led astray by a flawed philosophy of strength. They had confused aggression with power and volume with authority. She finished cleaning the last component and began the reassembly. Each part clicked into place with a sound of perfect tolerance, a testament to quality engineering and meticulous care. The trigger group slid into the lower receiver. The bolt carrier group slid into the upper. The charging handle locked it all in place. She joined the two halves of the rifle, pushing the pins home with a satisfying finality. The weapon was whole again, a tool of immense potential power, currently inert and harmless on the workbench. It was an object of perfect discipline, waiting for a clear and specific purpose. She looked down at the rifle, seeing her own faint reflection in the polished black steel. Her face was calm, her eyes clear. The reflection was not of a hero or a killer. It was the face of a professional who understood the true nature of the power she wielded. Strength is not the power to dominate. It is the discipline to wait.